What happens when a legendary soul icon comes face to face with a host who refuses to show respect? You won't believe what unfolds when the Queen of Funk herself, Chaka Khan, sits down with Jennifer Hudson for what was supposed to be a celebration of music legends. But instead of harmony, the studio erupted into one of the most explosive confrontations ever captured on live television. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouse voices clash in the most uncomfortable way possible. Last night's episode started like any other, with Jennifer Hudson's signature bright smile and enthusiastic energy as she welcomed her guest. But from the very first moment Chaka Khan stepped onto that stage, something felt different. The air was thick with intention that viewers could practically feel through their screens. Hudson, dressed in her usual glamorous attire, seemed almost too eager, too rehearsed, as if she was putting on a performance rather than genuinely welcoming one of music's most revered artists. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the incomparable, the legendary Chaka Khan, Hudson announced with theatrical flourish, her arms spread wide as the audience erupted in applause. But even in that moment of celebration, keen observers noticed something was off. Hudson's smile seemed forced, and there was an underlying current of condescension in her tone that made it sound like she was introducing a nostalgic act rather than a living legend who continued to influence artists worldwide. Chaka Khan emerged from backstage with her characteristic regal bearing, draped in flowing fabrics that seemed to move with the rhythm of her very being. At 70 years old, she still commanded attention like few others could, her presence filling the studio with an energy that was both magnetic and intimidating. But as she approached Hudson for the customary greeting, viewers could see a flicker of something in her eyes. Perhaps wariness, perhaps annoyance at something that had already transpired backstage. The hug between the two women was brief and awkward, more of a business transaction than a warm embrace between fellow artists. Hudson's laugh seemed a little too loud, a little too performative, while Khan's smile was polite but distant. As they settled into their respective chairs, the camera caught Khan adjusting her position slightly, as if creating more physical distance between herself and her host. "So, Chaka, first let me just say, you look absolutely stunning tonight," Hudson began. But even this compliment felt hollow, delivered with the kind of patronizing tone one might use with an elderly relative at a family gathering. Khan nodded graciously, but her response was measured, careful. "Thank you, Jennifer. It's good to be here," Khan replied, though her voice carried none of the warmth that fans were accustomed to hearing from the usually vibrant performer. There was something guarded about her demeanor, as if she was bracing herself for whatever was to come. Hudson leaned forward in her chair, adopting what appeared to be a more intimate conversational pose. But something about her body language felt predatory rather than friendly. "Now, I have to ask, because our viewers are dying to know, at this stage in your career, what keeps you motivated to keep performing? I mean, you've been doing this for so long." The question hung in the air like smoke, and viewers could practically see Khan processing not just the words, but the underlying implication. The phrase, "at this stage in your career," wasn't just innocent curiosity. It was a subtle dig, a way of suggesting that Khan was past her prime, a relic from a bygone era rather than the vibrant, relevant artist she remained. Khan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her composure with the grace of someone who had dealt with far worse throughout her decades in the spotlight. "Well, Jennifer," she began, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge, "I think what keeps me motivated is the same thing that should motivate any true artist: the music itself. Real artistry doesn't have an expiration date." The emphasis on the word real was subtle but unmistakable, and Hudson's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered with a laugh that sounded more nervous than amused. The studio audience, sensing the shift in energy, grew quieter, their earlier enthusiasm giving way to an uncomfortable awareness that something was brewing between these two women. "Oh, absolutely, absolutely," Hudson replied quickly, but her next words would prove to be gasoline on an already smoldering fire. "And speaking of real artistry, I have to say, it must be interesting for you to see how music has evolved. I mean, the industry is so different now from when you were, at the height of your fame. There it was, another not-so-subtle reference to Khan's supposed past relevance. Delivered with a smile that was becoming increasingly brittle, Khan's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment, the camera captured something dangerous flickering in her expression. The woman who had commanded stages worldwide, who had influenced countless artists, who had broken barriers and redefined what it meant to be a powerful female performer, was being treated like a museum piece by someone who wouldn't even exist in the industry without the foundation that legends like Khan had laid. The tension in the studio was becoming palpable now, with even the usually animated audience growing still as they sensed the undercurrents of conflict building between the two women. Hudson seemed oblivious to the effect her words were having, or perhaps she was too committed to whatever narrative she had planned to back down now. Khan leaned back in her chair, her posture shifting from merely guarded to something approaching defiant. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had earned every ounce of respect she commanded, and who wasn't about to let it be diminished by anyone, regardless of their current popularity or platform. "Jennifer," Khan said slowly, deliberately, "I think there might be some confusion here about what constitutes the height of someone's career." The words cut through the studio air like a blade, and Hudson's carefully maintained composure began to crack. Her smile became even more forced, and there was a flash of something ugly in her eyes. Perhaps anger at being challenged, or maybe just the realization that her guest wasn't going to play along with whatever diminishing narrative she had planned. "Oh, I didn't mean anything by that," Hudson said with a dismissive wave of her hand. But her tone betrayed her true feelings. There was an edge of irritation there, as if Khan was being unreasonable for taking offense at what Hudson clearly considered harmless commentary. "I just meant that the music industry has changed so much since the 70s and 80s. Khan's laugh was sharp and humorless, cutting through Hudson's attempt at backtracking like steel through silk. "Since the 70s and 80s? Jennifer, I had a #1 hit just a few years ago. I've been touring sold-out venues while some of today's so-called stars can't even fill half a theater without heavy promotion and discount tickets." The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence. Even the production crew seemed to sense that they were witnessing something unprecedented. A beloved guest systematically dismantling their host's condescending assumptions in real time. Hudson's face flushed slightly, and her media-trained instincts seemed to be failing her as she struggled to regain control of the conversation. "Well, of course, you're still performing," Hudson replied, but her voice had taken on a defensive quality that made her sound petulant rather than gracious. "I just think it's wonderful that artists from your generation are still out there doing their thing, It's inspiring to see someone your age still trying to stay relevant." The phrase hung in the air like a death sentence. Still trying to stay relevant. If Hudson had reached across the table and slapped Khan across the face, it couldn't have been more insulting. The implication was clear, that Khan was some desperate, has been clinging to past glory, rather than an active, vital artist who continued to create and influence music across generations. Khan's entire demeanor shifted in that moment. The polite, measured responses gave way to something much more dangerous. Her eyes blazed with a fury that had been building since the moment she walked onto this stage, and when she spoke, her voice carried the full weight of decades of experience dealing with people who had tried to diminish her throughout her career. "Someone my age?" Khan repeated, her voice rising slightly. "Let me tell you something, Jennifer. I was selling millions of records and changing the face of music when you were still in diapers. I've influenced artists who influenced the artists who influenced you. And you want to sit here and talk about me trying to stay relevant?" The audience gasped audibly. This wasn't the polite celebrity banter they had expected. This was raw, unfiltered confrontation between two women who clearly had very different perspectives on respect, talent, and the music industry itself. Hudson's face had gone from flushed to pale, and for the first time since the interview began, she seemed genuinely rattled. "I didn't mean it like that," Hudson stammered, but her protest sounded weak even to her own ears. "I have nothing but respect for what you've accomplished in your career." "Respect?" Khan's voice was incredulous now, and she leaned forward in her chair, her entire body language screaming confrontation. "You call this respect? Sitting here acting like I'm some relic from the past who should be grateful for the opportunity to appear on your little show." Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Hudson's mask was completely off now, and the real woman underneath was far less pleasant than the carefully crafted television persona she usually presented. Look, Chaka, I think you're being a little sensitive here, she said, her tone becoming sharp and dismissive. I'm just trying to have a conversation about your career, and you're acting like I'm attacking you or something. Sensitive? Khan's voice rose another octave, and several audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. You've spent this entire interview talking down to me like I'm some old lady you pulled out of a retirement home for a charity appearance. You want to see sensitive? This is me being professional. You don't want to see what happens when I stop being professional. The threat was unmistakable, and Hudson's eyes narrowed as her own temper finally began to show. Excuse me? Are you threatening me on my own show? I'm not threatening you, Khan replied, her voice deadly calm now. I'm educating you. Something your research team clearly failed to do before you decided to invite a 10-time Grammy winner onto your show just so you could patronize her on live television. Hudson stood up abruptly from her chair, her movement so sudden that it startled several people in the front row of the audience. You know what? I don't have to sit here and listen to this. I've been nothing but gracious to you since you walked onto this stage. Gracious? Khan laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Is that what you call it? Because, from where I'm sitting, you've been condescending, disrespectful, and completely unprofessional from the moment I sat down. Hudson's face twisted into something ugly, and the veneer of television politeness finally shattered completely. You know what, Chaka? Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is that you can't handle the fact that your time has passed. Maybe you can't deal with the fact that there are new voices, younger voices, that people actually want to hear from now. The studio fell into a shocked silence so complete that you could hear the hum of the cameras. Hudson had just crossed a line that no professional host should ever cross. She had made it personal, and she had done it in the most devastating way possible. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing television history or a career-ending meltdown. Khan rose slowly from her chair, and there was something regal and terrifying about the way she moved. She was no longer just an offended guest. She had transformed into something more powerful, more dangerous. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had earned her place in music history through talent, perseverance, and an unshakable belief in her own worth. Younger voices? Khan repeated, and her tone was ice-cold now. Let me tell you about younger voices, little girl. I've been mentoring younger voices since before you were born. I've helped launch careers. I've opened doors. I've paved roads that artists like you walk on every single day without even acknowledging where they came from. Hudson's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. She had clearly expected Khan to back down, to perhaps apologize or try to smooth things over. Instead, she found herself facing the full force of a woman who had spent decades fighting for respect in an industry that constantly tried to diminish powerful women. And you want to talk about what people want to hear? Khan continued, her voice rising with righteous fury. People want to hear authenticity. They want to hear soul. They want to hear music that comes from somewhere real, not manufactured in some boardroom by executives who think they know what sells. You think because you won some singing competition and got handed a television show that you understand what real artistry looks like? The cameras captured every moment of Hudson's humiliation as she stood there, speechless and exposed. Her carefully constructed image as America's sweetheart was crumbling in real time, revealing someone petty, insecure, and fundamentally lacking in the basic respect that should exist between artists. I built my career note by note, performance by performance, without anyone handing me anything, Khan continued, her words cutting through the silence like a sword. I fought for every opportunity, every recording contract, every moment on stage. And you have the audacity to sit here and suggest that my time has passed? My time isn't passing, honey. It's eternal. Real talent doesn't have an expiration date. Hudson finally found her voice, but what came out was desperate and ugly. This is my show. You're a guest here, and you need to show me some respect. Khan's laugh was sharp and cutting. Respect is earned, not demanded, and nothing you've done here tonight has earned you an ounce of respect from me or anyone else watching this disaster. The production team was clearly in chaos. Cameras continued rolling, but you could see people frantically moving around behind the scenes, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let this explosive moment play out. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked about moments in talk show history. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Jennifer," Khan said, her voice dropping to a more conversational tone that somehow felt more threatening than her earlier fury. "You could have learned something tonight. You could have sat here and actually listened to someone who's been where you're trying to go. You could have asked real questions about music, about artistry, about what it takes to have a career that spans decades instead of just a few fleeting years in the spotlight." Hudson's face was now bright red with embarrassment and anger. "I don't need career advice from someone who... From someone who what?" Khan interrupted, her voice sharp as a whip. "From someone who's actually earned her place in music history? From someone who doesn't need a team of producers and writers to tell her how to be authentic? From someone whose voice and talent speak for themselves?" The moment had arrived. Khan took a step back from her chair and looked directly into the camera, addressing not just Hudson, but the entire viewing audience. "I came here tonight thinking I was going to have a conversation with a fellow artist, someone who understood what it means to put your soul into your music. Instead, I found myself dealing with someone who thinks success means the right to disrespect those who came before her." Hudson made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Chaka, please, let's just..." "No." Khan's voice was final. "Absolute. I'm done. I'm done with this disrespect. I'm done with this unprofessionalism. And I'm done with you." She reached down and unclipped her microphone, the small gesture somehow carrying more weight than any dramatic speech could have. "I've been in this business for 50 years, and I've never walked out on an interview before. Congratulations, Jennifer. You managed to accomplish something no one else ever has." With that, Chaka Khan turned her back on Jennifer Hudson and began walking toward the exit. Her movement was deliberate, dignified, and utterly devastating. The cameras followed her every step as she made her way across the stage, her flowing garments trailing behind her like the train of a queen's robe. Hudson stood frozen in place, her mouth slightly open, looking like someone who had just watched their career implode in real time. The audience began to murmur, then whisper, then buzz with excitement, as the reality of what they had just witnessed began to sink in. As Khan reached the edge of the stage, she paused for just a moment and looked back over her shoulder. "For future reference," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent studio, "legends don't need your permission to be legendary." And with that final, devastating statement, Chaka Khan disappeared into the wings, leaving behind a host who had learned too late that some people's respect cannot be taken for granted, and that true greatness doesn't fade just because someone younger comes along. The show would go on, but Jennifer Hudson's reputation as a gracious host had ended the moment she decided to challenge the Queen of Funk on her own stage.